say Potts Farm was a place to go. Load a truck up, hit the dirt road, jump the barbed wire, spread the word. Like the king in the can, the Marlboro man. Jack and Jim were a few good men where you learn how to kiss and cuss and fight too. Better watch out for the boys in blue.
Alright folks, behind me is my old scooter boat, which is in terrible shape. It's been sitting since 2012 or 13, somewhere in that realm. Quite a long time. I've been seeing a lot of videos recently of people buying you know, old outboards and taking them home and trying to get them running, you know, getting a deal on the motor and, you know, let's see if it runs. And I see a ton of fatal mistakes. And guys, this video is not going to be wrench turning. It's going to be a whole lot of me talking and trying to pass on some knowledge about this. Because a lot of what these guys are doing are basically directly ruining these motors or causing catastrophic failure unknowingly, and I will explain in the video. From the time, excuse the critters, and everything is a mess here, we just went through a hurricane. From the time I was 16 until probably my early 20s, I worked in the marine industry for big companies, Boat US, Boaters World, you know, worked at their parts counters. I worked for one of the, if not the biggest, marine parts distributors for the Gulf Coast. So basically every little boat shop up and down the Gulf Coast, they would all get their parts, at least a bunch of their parts, from us. The other thing was at 18, 19, I wanted my own boat, and there was no way I could afford every spring to go in and spend, well, I think back then it was like $800-900 for the, you know, to do the basic water pump, spark plugs, give everything a flushing, and get you ready to go out the door for spring. I couldn't afford that. So the only way was I could afford to save up and buy the boat, but I had to learn how to work on it myself. I got to make some really good friendships with some really smart people when it comes to mechanic work, especially on OMC, which is Johnson Evinrude. Don't know a whole lot about the Mercs, but especially when it comes to these Johnny Rudes, man, I learned a ton from them. And I had the shop I could go to at any time. They'd loan me special tools. They'd walk me through when I was having a problem or trying to get something apart. I got a really interesting story that I will tell you that's going to validate a lot of what I'm going to tell you about this. But I'll hold that story for the end of the video because some of you guys probably don't want to listen to it. But anyway, that being said, so a lot of y'all go buy you a new motor. Just say it's something similar to these lines right here. You know, Johnny Rude, maybe it's a 70 horse, maybe it's a 10 horse. I'm worried about wasp nests in here, so I have not opened it yet. This motor has been, yep. See, I knew it. So before I started the video, I picked that cowling up. I mean, just an inch, but I slapped all over it and everything else, and no red wasps came out, so I figured I was in the clear. But I figured I was still going to take heed. But anyway, that one wire that ripped off was just the light that goes on top of the motor. Oh yeah, that was a big honking nest. 2 of them. Oh, son. Good old red waspus this is. Okay, I can tell you about quite a bit of it without getting up close to the motor. And explain quite a bit without being right up on top of it. So I'm going to set y'all right back here. And see, let's make sure y'all are pointed correctly. Alright. My wife's makeshift chicken coop in the back. This is a, I believe it's an 84 and 86. I can't remember. They're pretty much the same. Johnson Evinrude 115. So, like I told you, this boat hasn't run since, oh, to 2012, 13, somewhere in that realm. But say we didn't know that. We're going to buy this motor. We don't know anything about it, but it's been sitting for a really long time. The absolute last thing you want to do is hook gas up to it and try to start it. That is the worst thing you can do for it. I see a lot of guys go in and try to check, oh, we got spark, and, you know, do we have this, do we have that? Don't worry about all that. Take you a little ether, give it a light squirt in the carbs, and just a fine mist. Hook a battery up and just spin it over. You do not want to start it. If it pops off, you know you got spark. That's out of the way. You know you got compression. That's out of the way. Is your compression good? We'll get to that later. But to get us started, you know, that'll eliminate all that. But what I see is a lot of guys go through and they'll check compression, check spark. Okay, we got all that. They'll hook fuel up to it and try to start it. That is the Achilles heel. That's what kills you. You can guarantee that those carburetors have trash in them. It may not run because of the carburetors being so stopped up, but it may run, especially on these bigger engines where the jets are a little bit bigger in them. They'll still flow fuel. But on a two-stroke engine, keep in mind you're mixing oil and fuel. So if that jet is restricted and you're only flowing half the amount of fuel you're supposed to flow through that particular orifice, okay? This motor is a 4-cylinder. It has 2 carburetors, but each carburetor is a 2-barrel. So basically each cylinder has its own barrel. But if you're flowing half the amount of fuel through that one cylinder, and just say the other 3 are getting full amount of fuel, but you're running that one cylinder lean. Lean creates excessive heat, but the biggest thing is on a 2-stroke, you're not getting the amount of oil you're supposed to have. And essentially what's going to happen is you're going to cook the rings out of it like that. In the most likely of cases, you'll get it to run, but you probably get it to idle. You can probably even get it to run on earmuffs and rev it up and everything, and it works fine. But as soon as you put it in the water and you put a load on the motor and you go to give it gas, it bogs and doesn't want to run right, so forth, so on. That is all stopped up carburetor. If the whole time you're doing that, you're running the motor lean, you're running it light on oil, you're basically cooking the rings out of the cylinders. At a bare minimum, I mean the bare minimum, is pull the carburetors off and tear into them, clean them up. A set of torch tip cleaners works really, really good to push up through the jets and clean the jets out and so forth, so on. Ethanol fuel is a major problem. Maybe you got lucky and they ran non-ethanol fuel in it. That's going to save you a whole lot of heartache. I will tell you that 90% of the time you do not need carburetor kits. The gaskets are a rubber material that just seems to last and be okay. I've rebuilt these carburetors I can't tell you how many times, and I don't think I've ever replaced the gaskets in them. I always reuse the old ones. Floats, same way. They're a plastic float. Unless it's dry rotted and cracked and taking on fuel, then the float's fine, reuse it. Be very, 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 very careful on your jetting. Do not change the jets. Whatever jets are in it. The only time I would say that it's worthwhile to change jets is if you're having a running issue and you're going to change them based off of reading the spark plugs. But running these engines lean on these older 2-strokes is a death sentence to them. So trying to take a motor you just bought and force some fuel through it and try to get it running is the worst thing you can do for it. You notice a lot of those videos, or at least I noticed, that a lot of these guys, they get a new engine, they slap it on a boat, and they take it out, and they got video of them out on the pond, putting around, it's running like craps, dying on them and everything else. You don't usually hear any more videos about them running them anymore, and you know, I can only assume that's because they've lost compression. Guys, just don't do it. Rebuild the carbs. They're stupid simple. Very mechanically inclined. I mean, build motors, do everything, and I won't touch a Holly on a like a small block 350 or anything like that, a quadra-junk. I won't touch them. I'm not saying that I'm scared to. I just never done it. They intimidate me a little bit, I guess you would say. But these are so stupid simple. They are on the equivalency of a carburetor on your lawnmower. That's how easy they are. If they're a little bit later model and they have VRO, that's where the oil is directly injected. You don't mix it. It mixes it for you. We delete the VRO on all of our two-stroke outboards, and it's mainly that there's nothing to fail. If you mix the oil and the gas, you're never going to run it without oil, versus a VRO pump failing. They say it's supposed to double oil the motor, but I can tell you from personal experience, it doesn't always do that. I locked a Johnson GT 150 up 41 miles offshore out of Freeport, Texas, with my wife and toddler kids in the boat. Because a VRO pump went out, it did not double oil the motor. But anyway, so look, my main rant here, do not run it without rebuilding those carburetors. The next thing is water pumps. So as an industry standard, that rubber water pump impeller should be replaced every year. Every spring it should get a new water pump impeller. Now, do I follow that practice? No. Do most people? No. Can you get away with it? Yes. You won't, they'll last a couple years. They even last, where you can take them and back them off in the, pond or the lake and fire the motor up, and it creates water pressure. It's flowing water. But if you get one that you don't know the history on, guys, that's cheap insurance. I mean, a water pump impeller is $30. It's a little bit of a chore to do. It's mainly just dropping the lower unit, so undoing the bolts that hold the lower unit on. The trickiest part of all of it is the shift shaft that comes up through the center right under the carburetors, right up through the motor. That shift shaft's probably the trickiest part to doing the whole thing, and if you're going to take the carburetors off of it, that is the ultimate time to go ahead and drop that foot and do a water pump, because that shift shaft is super easy to get to. Just keep that in mind. But it's cheap insurance. You can't go wrong with replacing a water pump. The ones that have been sitting for years and years and years, and I say you can start them up, take them down to the boat launch and back it in, and it'll run and flow water for a minute. Yeah, it will. But prolonged running at 2,500, 3,000, 3,500 RPMs, it's going to break the ears off the water pump. It's just a matter of time. That rubber just cannot stand to stay dry that long. Another false hope is people will hook those earmuffs that go around the lower unit. You hook your water hose up to it. They'll hook the water hose up and fire the motor up, and it's peeing, it's got water pressure, it's flowing, it's not overheating. Guys, the water pressure from your water hose, your city water pressure, well water, whatever it is where the pressure is being created from. It's not the water pump. The water pump should only create around 30 pounds of pressure. Most city outlets are going to be between 40 and 60 pounds. And that's fine, no problem. But don't mistake the motor peeing and flowing water when it's hooked up to earmuffs for the water pump is fine. Definitely not the case. The only way to be really surefire would be to put it in the water and let it suck its own water. Put it in a bucket, a tub, something like that, and see if it'll suck its own water. But again, even though prolonged run at higher RPM, it'll cook the ears right off of it, and then you're overheating the motor. And let me tell you something that these motors do not like, and that's to be overheated. It's never good for them. So you buy an old outboard, guys, pull the carburetors off of them. They're stupid easy to work on. Most of the time you do not need a carburetor kit. Even if you do, I want to say last time I bought carburetor kits, I want to say they were right at 30-40 bucks a piece, and there's 2 carburetors on here, so that's 2 of them you would need for this particular motor. Cheap insurance, but if you've got compression and you go out and run this motor lean, good chance you won't have compression when you get back, at least on a couple cylinders. That's the main rant. Those are the couple of things that it's mainly carburetors and water pump that I see people making drastic mistakes out of. Now, I want to get away from these wasps. Crick. I'm sure it's crooked too. Okay, years ago, I was in my late teens, early 20s, when I worked for that big marine distributor. They also did mechanic work there as well. GLM was a big company that made reman outboard engine blocks. So if you blew your motor up, you could go to GLM and they'd send you a reman engine block, and we could peel that block off, put a new block on, and get you going down the road. This old boy had a man, it was a big motor. It was a V6 Johnny Rude. I don't remember the horsepower rating on it, but it was big. It was on a 19-foot Cajun bass boat. Hell of a nice boat. Hell of a nice guy. He cooked that motor and brought it into us. Bought a GLM. They come with like a 6-month warranty or something like that. He come back in after he got it back and locked the motor up again. I mean, like within 2 weeks. And called GLM, and okay, they sent us another one. We sent that one back to them and sent him out the door. Fluke deal, right? Just something wrong. A week goes by, we get it back in the shop. He locked up another motor. At this point, everybody's starting to kind of raise their eyebrows. All right, he cooked a motor, he brought it in, we replaced power head, he cooked it again, we replaced that one, he cooked it again. So GLM was like, hey guys, this is last straw, y'all need to figure out what the hell's going on here. Well, it had multiple mechanics completely stumped. They had no clue. Well, hello, donkey. They couldn't figure it out. So I got with, remember I said I had one of the biggest OMC dealers in the US, was really good friends of mine. And I got with them and took the boat to them. And I actually ended up taking it out to their house on Lake Conroe. And their tech met me out there on a Saturday. So we put the boat in the water and we ran it. And get this. So what happened is we'd run the motor and then we'd pull the plugs and read the plugs. And I had 2 cylinders that were running extremely lean. Mind you, on all these old carbureted motors, each cylinder has its own barrel. So it's got its own main jet, its own idle circuit, its own everything. It's basically like having 6 carburetors on a V6. The carburetors are set up in pairs. Actually, on that motor, they weren't. They were plastic carburetors, and they were set up individually, staggered. We ended up rejetting the carburetors, and we only had to touch 2 of them. But we had to rejet those 2, and the jet sizes we jumped was pretty significant. I mean, it was a lot. They had to go up significantly in fuel. What we found out was that GLM, when they would bore a block out to rebuild it, they would not bore all the cylinders the same. So they may bore 4 out of 6 at 10 thousandths over, but the other 2 had deeper scratches in them, and they might bore them 30 or 40 thousandths over. Nobody told us anything about that. Nobody said anything about that. But basically, the difference in them boring that cylinder and opening it up, making more cubic inches, not much, but it was enough that those cylinders were running lean on the factory jets, in turn burning the motors up. So we don't know why the first one burned up, and I say that I think we do. I think it was a trash bag around the lower unit or something like that, got caught from the lake. But at least the GLM units, that's what it ended up being, because they bored 2 cylinders, 30 thousandths over, and the rest of them were only 10 thousandths over. Those 2 cylinders were now running lean because they were not jetted to compensate for the bigger cylinder size. So, of course, after everything was rejetted, we put it all back together, ran it, all the plugs read clean, put it back on the trailer, give it back to the customer. 5 years later, I know he was still running that boat on that same outboard and never had a problem with it. But to give you an idea, that's all the tolerance it takes for one of those to run lean and burn the rings up in them. You cannot run 2-strokes lean. Do not just hook fuel up to them and try to run them. Pull the carburetors down, at least do a quick down and dirty clean job on them, knock all the trash out of them, get everything out of the jets, make sure it's flowing properly, then put them on and go run it. It doesn't take long, it's easy to do, most of the time doesn't require parts. Save yourselves some headache. One other thing I had a little 10-horse outboard I had up on for sale on Facebook Marketplace a while back, and I showed it running on in my shop. I didn't have it hooked up to water hose, didn't have it in a bucket, didn't have it nothing. And this one got to me. I knew the water pump was toast in it. This is a 1971 10-horse Johnson outboard, been sitting for over 20 years. And all I did was let it run for about 15 seconds. So I started it up with the video running and just showed it running for about 10 seconds and killed it. I had a guy message me, claimed he was a boat mechanic, been working on boats all his life. He's like, you can't fix stupid, and cussing me up one side, down the other, saying I trashed the whole motor and everything, right? So I kind of got into it with him a little bit and was like, what makes you think that, dude? I already told you it needed a water pump. I say it in the description. In his mind, that whole lower unit was full of water, and all the bearings and shafts and everything were cooled by water. No, Bubba, that's not how they work. If you have ever rebuilt a water pump or put a new impeller in, you know that there is a tube goes into the top of the water pump housing. It takes all the water straight up to the bottom of the engine block. So water flows through the water jacket and the engine block and then gets pushed out. There are thermostats in most of these, but still. I mean, this guy swore up and down that I just cooked that motor. I'd ruined every bearing and seal in it. And it goes back to that, you just got to pay attention to who you listen to, guys. And you don't have to take my advice for it or my word for it. Do a little research, but I think you're going to find what I'm telling you is true. Well, I don't know everything, and I've learned on YouTube over the years, you do not listen to one person's video. You do not listen to what one person says. I get a common overview, right? So I'm going to take multiple people, and if they're all kind of saying the same thing, then I'll go with that. But if one guy says something and it just doesn't click right in my head, I ain't listening to him. You go back to, some of you will know this, some of you won't, but a friend of mine has a 7.3 Power Stroke. It's a later, I think it was a 2000 or 2001. And he saw a video on YouTube about somebody showing him how to change the oil in the high pressure oil pump. I'm like, oh my God, really? Oh yeah, this guy, he did. He full on used a syringe, disconnected the lines, pulled the oil out of the high pressure oil pump, and put new oil in it. Dude, really, it gets the oil out of the oil pan. It's all the same oil. It doesn't. Wow. So there's idiots out there. So just fair warning. That's just a little information on these motors that I know and hold to be true. Seen it all my life. I run these. I kept this boat. I love this boat. Transom's bad in it, so it's got to be pulled down. Deck's probably got to be redone on it again. I'm looking at some of that new aerospace material they're using. It's a fiber board, super light, lighter than carbon fiber, but stronger, and it is. It's wild. But to redeck it and do the race center console, I want to put a new console on it. That old steel mount was a temporary radar mount. It turned temporary permanent. I just never took it off. But anyway, I hope there's some good information there for you guys, but please, please, please stop firing these motors up, pouring gas to them. They've been sitting for years. Not going to be good. It's just a bad, bad deal. That being said, I'll see you on the next one. I got a bunch of footage shot. I just got to spend the time to edit it. It's starting to get rained on here. I'll try to get on that this week and try to get some more stuff kicked out. But in the meantime, enjoy.